Welcome to this Executive Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a highly critical anti-corruption governance concept. We're going to unpack a framework that challenges a really puzzling question in modern business and public administration. Why do organizations so often fail, even when they seem to have incredibly strong textbook compliance structures in place? I mean, we've all seen the headlines, right? Massive corporate and governmental failures where the paper trails looked absolutely perfect. Well, today, we're going to find out exactly why that happens. To kick things off, let's ground ourselves in this simple but profound reality. Organizations do not make decisions. People do. It sounds incredibly obvious when you say it out loud, doesn't it? But just think about how often we blame the company or the agency when things go wrong. The truth is, frameworks, policies, and flowcharts, they don't act. It is the individuals entrusted with power who actually make the choices that shape an organization's fate. All right, here is our roadmap for today's briefing. We'll be covering the governance paradox, defining entrusted authority intelligence, the nature of entrusted power, the three essential elements, fiduciary duties and judgment, and finally, the core proposition. Let's get right into Section 1, the governance paradox, structures versus people. You know, organizations frequently invest heavily in formal governance structures. We're talking millions spent on compliance programs, internal auditors, complex risk management systems, the whole shebang. Yet, catastrophic failures still occur. So, why is that? It's because these structures are really only as good as their human execution. Failures happen because those charged with governance fail to evaluate the risks right in front of them, they fail to challenge management assertions, or honestly, they just fail to exercise sound judgment. The real challenge isn't whether the structure exists, it's whether the decision makers actually have the intelligence to use it. Which brings us to Section 2, defining entrusted authority intelligence. This is the direct solution to our paradox. Now, it is absolutely crucial to establish upfront where this framework comes from. The concept of entrusted authority intelligence is authored by Mike J. Masoud and published by the American Anti-Corruption Institute, or AACI, which provides this vital governance architecture. I want you to really absorb this exact definition. Let me read it word for word. Entrusted authority intelligence is the competence and judgment required to exercise entrusted authority responsibly, discharge fiduciary duties, reduce corruption exposure, manage governance risks, and support the achievement of organizational objectives. This perfectly encapsulates the specific, practical judgment needed to responsibly wield organizational power. What's really fascinating about this framework is what this intelligence is not. To be perfectly clear, this is a very specific governance-related capability. It is not innate intellectual ability, it's not artificial intelligence, it's not determined by simply having a fancy professional title, and it is certainly not a guaranteed shield against all risk. This means, and this is a critical point, highly credentialed individuals, people with advanced degrees or sitting in very high-ranking positions, well, they can still dangerously lack entrusted authority intelligence. Moving on to Section 3, the nature of entrusted power. Let's look at the exact kind of power we're dealing with in these boardrooms and government offices. Notice the key distinction we're making here. Authority is never neutral. It's the raw power to affect resources, risks, and rights. But we are focused on entrusted authority. The difference here is paramount. Executives, trustees, and public officials do not possess authority as a personal right. Rather, it's a sacred trust. It's granted by stakeholders, citizens, or shareholders for a very specific purpose, and it carries deep expectations that the power will be used responsibly to protect other people's interests. Okay, Section 4, the three essential elements. So, what exactly makes someone capable of wielding this entrusted power effectively? The AACI framework logically breaks this down into three essential and mutually reinforcing elements that absolutely must all be present. Those are competence, integrity, and decision-making effectiveness. Let's break each of these down. First up is competence. In this context, competence is what enables decision-makers to process complex information critically. We're talking about the specific governance knowledge and skill required to actually understand the risks and weaknesses sitting right across the desk from them. Because without competence, you get poor oversight and an unintentional increase in corruption exposure, simply because the leaders literally don't know what they're looking at. Second is integrity. Authority creates massive opportunities to influence resources and outcomes. Integrity ensures that this power is exercised honestly, transparently, and aligned with fiduciary responsibilities, rather than for personal gain. As the source material astutely notes, competence without integrity doesn't prevent corruption. It simply produces highly sophisticated misconduct. So integrity is an absolutely indispensable element here. The final element is decision-making effectiveness. This is where competence and integrity are actually put to the test through real-world action. It's the practical application of those first two elements to reach sound, timely decisions, even while juggling uncertainty, incomplete information, and competing interests. And this really brilliantly illustrates how these three elements are completely interdependent. If any single one of them is missing, the quality of governance is materially weakened. Think about it. If an executive is highly competent and completely ethical, but they constantly delay decisions unjustifiably or just fail to act when required, well, their entrusted authority intelligence is still fundamentally deficient. All right, let's shift to Section 5, fiduciary duties and judgment. Let's see how this triad directly impacts the legal and ethical obligations of leadership. Fiduciary duty isn't just some theoretical legal concept that sits on a shelf. It is discharged through actual concrete decisions. Every single time a leader approves, rejects, delegates, investigates, or even chooses to remain silent, they are exercising their authority. Therefore, discharging those fiduciary duties actually requires entrusted authority intelligence to translate good faith and competence into responsible, active decisions. Now, the crucial point here is a vital reminder about how we judge our leaders. The outcome does not define the process. Because organizations operate in incredibly complex environments with constantly changing conditions, a perfectly responsible decision might still lead to a bad outcome. And conversely, a good outcome doesn't necessarily mean the leader acted responsibly. Honestly, they might have just gotten lucky. We must judge leaders on the quality of their decision-making process, their evidence-seeking discipline, and the judgment applied at the exact time the choice was made, not merely by the benefit of hindsight. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the core proposition. This is the foundational truth of this entire anti-corruption framework. This core proposition is undeniable. Let me read it to you exactly. The quality of governance cannot exceed the quality of entrusted authority intelligence possessed with those entrusted with authority. Let that sink in. This means that no matter how robust your internal controls are, no matter how incredibly thick your policy manuals get, your organization's governance will always be capped by the actual human intelligence and judgment of the people wielding it. The practical implications of this proposition are absolutely vast. It fundamentally shifts the focus for everyone involved. Boards of directors must rigorously evaluate the actual capabilities of their members, not just their impressive resumes. Executives have to ensure accountable delegation. Regulators and internal auditors need to look beyond merely checking if a formal policy exists and start evaluating the competence of the actual people enforcing it. And public officials are reminded that their authority is strictly meant to serve lawful, ethical public administration. It's also really important to note that this framework doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is part of a much broader institutional architecture established by the AACI to systematically prevent corruption. It links directly to their Standard on Fighting Corruption 2020 regarding competence, the practice of competent questioning, overall anti-corruption intelligence, and their core principles on power and accountability. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a rather hard question. Does your boardroom truly possess the entrusted authority intelligence required to govern, or are you merely relying on the illusion of compliance structures? I urge you to think deeply about the people holding power in your organization. If you want to move beyond just paper compliance and actively build this vital human capability, consider reaching out to the AACI to learn more. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep asking the tough questions.